Buying a house is often called the American dream. Renting, on the other hand, is usually described as throwing money away. Most people hear this so often that they stop questioning it. But what if the real question isn't whether buying or renting is good or bad, but whether you're actually making the smarter financial move for your situation? Let's start with a simple story. Two friends, both 30 years old, both earning around $90,000 a year, living in the same city. One of them decides it's time to buy a house. The other keeps renting. 10 years later, one feels financially stretched and locked into decisions they can't easily undo. The other has flexibility, a growing investment portfolio, and more choices. And surprisingly, it's not obvious who made the better decision at first glance. When people think about buying a house, they usually focus on the mortgage payment. If rent is $2,200 a month and the mortgage is $2,100, buying feels like the smarter move. But the mortgage is only one part of the cost. Home ownership comes with property taxes, homeowner's insurance, maintenance, repairs, HOA fees, and occasional large expenses that arrive without warning. Studies consistently show that the true cost of owning a home in the United States is often 30 to 60% higher than the mortgage payment alone. That means a $2,100 mortgage can easily behave like a $2,800 or even $3,200 monthly expense once everything is included. Maintenance alone averages about 1% of a home's value per year. On a $400,000 house, that's roughly $4,000 annually, and that's in normal years. A roof replacement, HVAC failure, or plumbing issue can easily push costs much higher. These expenses don't show up in online mortgage calculators, but they show up in real life. Now let's talk about appreciation, because this is usually the strongest argument for buying. Yes, U.S. home prices have historically risen over time. Long-term averages put appreciation at around 3 to 4% per year above inflation. But that growth is not smooth and it's not guaranteed. It depends heavily on location, timing, and how long you stay in the home. Buying at the wrong time or selling too soon can erase years of gains. Transaction costs are another hidden factor. Buying and selling a home typically costs 8 to 10% of the home's value once you include real estate commissions, closing costs, and moving expenses. On a $400,000 home, that's $32,000 to $40,000 gone before you even think about profit. This is why research shows that buying usually only makes financial sense if you plan to stay in the home at least 7 to 10 years. Now let's look at renting, which often gets unfairly dismissed. Renting does not build home equity, but it buys something else that's extremely valuable: flexibility. When you rent, your costs are predictable. You don't worry about surprise repairs or sudden property tax increases. If your job changes or a better opportunity appears in another city, moving is relatively easy. Here's the part most people ignore. When you rent, the money you don't lock into a house can be invested elsewhere. Suppose owning a house costs $3,000 a month all in, while renting a similar place costs $2,200. That $800 difference, if invested monthly into a diversified stock portfolio earning long-term average returns of 8 to 10%, can grow to over $1 million over 30 years. That's not a hypothetical. That's the power of compound growth. Buying does have one major advantage: leverage. A home allows you to control a large asset with a relatively small down payment. A 20% down payment on a $400,000 home gives you exposure to the full value of the property. If prices rise steadily and you stay long-term, that leverage can work in your favor. But leverage cuts both ways. If prices stagnate or fall, you still owe the debt, and your equity can disappear quickly. This brings us back to our two friends. The one who bought stretched their budget to make the purchase work. When job opportunities came up in other cities, selling the house would have meant a loss, so they stayed. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The renter moved twice for better opportunities, increased income, and invested aggressively along the way. One chose stability, the other chose mobility. Both paid a price. Both gained something. Inflation is another important factor. Home ownership can protect against inflation because fixed-rate mortgages lock in housing costs, while rents tend to rise over time. But this advantage only works if the purchase price and mortgage are reasonable. Buying too much house at high interest rates can turn inflation protection into financial stress.
So what's the real answer? Buying isn't always better, and renting isn't always worse. Buying tends to make sense when you plan to stay long-term, your income is stable, housing costs remain manageable, and you can still invest after becoming a homeowner. Renting often makes sense when flexibility matters, when you're early in your career, when markets are expensive, or when buying would stretch your finances too thin. The mistake is turning housing into an emotional milestone instead of a financial decision. A house can be an asset, but it can also become an expensive liability if it limits your options. The smartest move isn't choosing what society praises, it's choosing what gives you the most control over your future. Because the real goal isn't owning a house, the goal is owning choices.